picture the most beautiful palace in England. Now fill it with the smell of birthing blood that won't wash out of the floorboards. Add 1,500 courtiers holding their breath, a king who has already killed one wife and divorced another, and a woman upstairs who's been screaming for 2 days and 3 nights. That's Hampton Court in October of 1537. The most magnificent building in the kingdom, and the most frightened. A place where you could watch the future of England being born in the morning and start sewing its mother's shroud before the month was out. We're going back there tonight, not as courtiers watching the pageantry. We're going as one pair of hands among hundreds, one girl with a needle pulled out of a London workshop and dropped into the middle of the strangest 3 weeks the Tudor court ever lived through. Everything she would have seen, smelled, heard, touched, and survived. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I have no clue if anyone actually sleeps to them or if you're all just lying in the dark wondering what embalming spices smell like at 2 in the morning. Either way, subscribe if you want, get comfortable. Here we go. The first thing you need to understand is that you are sewing black cloth before anyone has died. That's the part nobody tells you about royal courts. Death is anticipated, death is budgeted, death has a supply chain. And on the morning of the 20th of October, 1537, while the whole of London is still ringing its bells for the birth of a prince, while the Tower guns are still warm from firing 2,000 rounds in celebration, a barge is already moving up the Thames toward Hampton Court carrying bolts of black cloth, black thread, black ribbon, and you. Your name is Cecily Aldworth. You're 16 years old, and your hands are the reason you're on this barge, not your face, not your family. God knows. Your father mends fishing nets in Bermondsey, and your mother has been dead of the sweat since you were 9. Your hands. 3 years ago, Mistress Joan Vaughan, silkwoman of Cheapside, watched you hem a kerchief in the church porch of St. Mary le Bow, a kerchief you were hemming for a farthing, because a farthing bought bread. And she looked at your stitches the way other people look at jewels. She counted them, 14 stitches to the inch, even and small as grains of sand done in bad light with cold fingers. "Who taught you that?" she asked. "Nobody, mistress. Hunger taught me." She took you on the spot. 3 years in her workshop above the shop in Cheapside, and now you can do things with a needle that most women twice your age cannot. You can couch gold thread onto velvet without puckering it. You can turn a hem so fine it disappears. You can sew for 10 hours by candlelight and your last stitch will match your first. Mistress Vaughan supplies the court. Ribbons, points, laces, silk trimmings, the small precious things that hold great clothing together. Which is why, when the summons came down the river 2 days ago, the Queen delivered of a prince, a christening to be furnished, every silkwoman and broiderer and tailor in London wanted at once. Mistress Vaughan packed her best work and her best apprentice and got on a barge. That was for the christening. That was for joy. This barge, this second barge, the one you're on now, is different, because yesterday a different kind of message came. Quieter. Carried by a man who didn't shout it from the water stairs the way the christening summons was shouted. The Queen is unwell. Just that. 2 words that mean nothing and everything. Women are unwell after childbirth all the time. Half of them are unwell. But the court doesn't send for black cloth because a woman is tired. The court sends for black cloth because somewhere in the offices of the Lord Chamberlain, a man whose entire job is to be ready, has looked at the reports coming out of the Queen's bedchamber and made a decision. Prepare, quietly, just in case. So here you are, sitting on a bolt of black wool worth more than your father earns in a year, watching the brown water of the Thames slide past, and the tide is with you, and the October air smells of wet rope and river mud, and the fish gut reek of the city falling away behind you. And nobody on this barge is saying the thing everybody on this barge is thinking. You might be sewing for a funeral before you finish sewing for a christening. The waterman leans into his oars. His hands are cracked across the knuckles, old rope burns healed white. You watch them because watching hands is what you do. It's how you learned everything you know. Watching Mistress Vaughan's hands, stealing knowledge through your eyes. His breath smokes in the cold. Somewhere behind you, one of the tailor's men starts to whistle and stops himself, because whistling feels wrong, and then the only sounds are oars and water and the creak of the boat, and very far off, still after 3 days, church bells. They're still ringing for the Prince, every parish in London. Te Deum sung in every church, bonfire in the streets, free wine running from the conduits at Cheapside. You saw it before you left, men catching wine in their caps, in their cupped hands, in their open mouths, hogsheads of beer given out at the Tower, 2,000 guns, the whole city drunk with relief, because England has waited 28 years of this king's reign for a legitimate son, and 2 wives have gone into the ground or into disgrace failing to produce one. And now, finally, on the 12th of October, the eve of St. Edward's Day, a woman named Jane Seymour did the one thing the 2 cleverer, more dazzling women before her could not. And the bells ring on, and under the bells, on the quiet water, a boat carries black cloth toward her. Hold that in your head. That's the whole story, right there in one picture. Keep it. We'll come back to it. The barge rounds the last bend, and Hampton Court comes up out of the river mist like something dreamed. You've never seen it before. You've heard of it. Everyone's heard of it. The Cardinal's palace that the king took for his own, the newest, richest, reddest thing in England. But hearing is nothing. The bricks are the colour of dried blood and new fire at once, laid in patterns, diapered with darker bricks in crosses and diamonds. Chimneys twist up out of the roofline like barley sugar, dozens of them, each one carved differently, each one smoking. Gilded weather vanes catch the grey light. The king's beasts stand on the bridge over the moat. Lions, dragons, greyhounds, painted and gilded, holding shields. It is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen, and your first thought, the honest first thought of a net mender's daughter is, how do they keep the soot off all that gold? The answer, you will learn, is people. People like you. Hundreds and hundreds of people like you. The barge doesn't go to the Grand Watergate. Of course it doesn't. You're cargo, and cargo goes to the service stairs downstream, where the fish comes in, where the wood comes in, where the endless barrels come in. You climb out onto wet stone steps slick with fish scales, and a man in the Lord Chamberlain's livery checks Mistress Vaughan's letter, and checks it again, and looks at the black cloth being unloaded, and his face does something complicated. He knows what it means too. Everyone who sees this cargo knows what it means, and every one of them has been told to say nothing. Wardrobe Court, he says, follow the boy, and mistress, keep the cloth covered. They give you canvas to lay over the black, as if it were contraband, as if hope itself might be injured by the sight of it. You lift your end of a bolt of wool, and the weight of it settles into your arms. A full broadcloth bolt is heavier than a child, heavier than a sack of flour, an awkward dead weight that digs into your forearms and makes your fingers ache before you've gone 40 steps. And you follow the boy through a gate, under an arch, into the palace, and the palace swallows you. Later, you will know these passages the way you know your own teeth. Tonight they're a maze, brick and stone and sudden courtyards, the smell changing every 20 paces, wood smoke, then roasting meat that makes your empty stomach clench, then tallow, then the sharp green smell of rushes, then piss, because even palaces have corners, then cold stone, then smoke again. Servants stream past in both directions, all of them moving fast, all of them carrying something. Firewood, ewers, folded linen, a silver dish with a cloth over it, a brace of dead partridges swinging by their feet. Nobody looks at you. You're 2 hands and a burden, one of 1,000, invisible. And that's the second thing you need to understand about this place. Invisibility is not an insult here. Invisibility is the job. The whole palace is a machine for making 600 people's labour disappear so that 50 people's grace can seem effortless. You will spend the next 3 weeks inside the walls of that machine, in its hidden rooms, sewing its most secret work. The wardrobe court, when you reach it, is chaos wearing an orderly face. Trestle tables have been set up under a covered walk. Tailor's men are already cutting. Not black, not yet. The black goes into a locked room. But cloth of gold, white satin, crimson velvet, all the glory needed for a prince's christening, which happens in 3 days on the 15th. No, you count back. The christening happened 5 days ago on the 15th. Time is already slipping on you. The summons, the packing, the waiting for the tide. Today is the 20th. The christening is done. Done at midnight, they'll tell you. 400 guests the baby prince carried under a canopy to the chapel royal, while his mother lay on a daybed of crimson and gold, wrapped in velvet and fur, receiving the procession because tradition demanded she receive it. 12 days after a labour that lasted 2.5 days and nearly killed her. She sat up for hours. Cold corridors, an autumn midnight, 400 people filing past. Remember that detail. The doctors will spend the next 4 centuries arguing about what killed Jane Seymour, and nobody will ever know for certain, but you will hear the women of her chamber say it plainly, bitterly, in the days to come. They made her sit up. She took cold. They let her eat whatever she fancied, because who refuses a queen who has just given England its future? For now, all you know is what the wardrobe clerk tells Mistress Vaughan, while you stand behind her with your arms full of thread boxes, trying not to shiver. The christening stuff is nearly done. It's the other matter. His voice drops. Her Grace took a turn Friday night. There was hope Sunday. She mended. They let the household rejoice a little. Then last night, he shakes his head, the smallest movement. The physicians were with her till dawn. Her confessor has been sent for. Mistress Vaughan's face doesn't change. That's a lesson too. How many mourners will they clothe if God forbids? If God forbids, everyone. The whole court goes into black. But the wardrobe holds stores for the great folk. What we lack is hands. The clerk of the wardrobe has cloth. He has no fingers. You'll lodge over the wardrobe court. You'll be paid from the great wardrobe account. A pause. And mistress. It's not to be spoken of. Not while she lives. There are those who'd call it treason to dress the Queen's death before God has willed it. And there it is. The knife edge you will live on for the next 4 days. In a locked room behind you sits enough black cloth to drape a kingdom, and in a bedchamber 2 courtyards away lies a 28-year-old woman burning with fever, and between those 2 rooms stands the law itself, and the law says, to imagine the death of the king's wife is treason. Men have died for saying less than what your cargo says just by existing. So you will sow joy in the daylight, where people can see. And you will wait the way the whole palace is waiting for the night work to begin. They lodge you in a garret above the wardrobe court, and this is where your body first learns what the palace costs. The room is long and low, tucked under the roof tiles, and it holds 11 women on straw pallets. Sempstresses, a broiderer's widow from Southwark, 2 of Mistress Vaughan's rivals who greet her with smiles thin as thread. The pallet is clean, cleaner than home, but the cold comes through the tiles at night like water through a bad seam, and you sleep in your gown and your cloak and you're still cold, and in the morning your fingers are so stiff you have to work them under your armpits before they'll hold a needle. That's the thing about your trade that nobody thinks about. A carpenter can work half frozen, a cook works warm by definition, but fine sewing lives in the last inch of your fingers, in the small muscles and the fine feeling, and cold kills it. Cold makes your stitches grow. A stitch that should be a grain of sand becomes a grain of barley, and Mistress Vaughan sees it from across the room without seeming to look and says, "Warm your hands, Cecily," in a voice that means the stitch comes out. So you learn the palace the way a servant learns it, by its heat. The bakehouse wall is warm at all hours. Press your back to it for the count of 200 and your blood comes back. The great kitchen breathes out through its doorways like a beast, and if you time your errands past it, you can steal warmth the way you once stole knowledge, with nothing but nearness. 200 cooks and boys work in there. In heat so fierce the turnspits work stripped to the waist, basted in their own sweat like the meat, and the smell rolling out is beef fat and wood smoke and boiling stockfish and spice. Real spice, cinnamon and pepper, burning in sauces you will never taste. The court eats 600 meals twice a day, oxen whole, sheep by the dozen. You eat bread and pottage and a slice of cheese in the wardrobe court with the other workwomen, and it is more than you'd eat at home, and you are grateful, and your stomach still growls at the kitchen smell like a dog at a fence. The daylight work, those first 2 days, is finishing. Hemming banners, whipping the raw edges of 100 yards of white sarsenet, sewing tiny gold aglets to the points of sleeves for gentlemen you will never see wearing them. Your needle goes in and out, 6 stitches a breath, and around you the women talk in the particular half-voice of workrooms, and everything worth knowing in the palace flows through that room like water through a mill race. This is how you learn about her. The Queen, not from proclamations, from women. Bess Harding tells you most of it. She's a laundress attached to the Queen's side of the house. Not the body linen, she's quick to say. That's above her. The body linen is handled by the Queen's own women. But the second linen, sheets and board cloths and the endless towels, and laundresses know everything because everything human ends up in linen sooner or later. Bess is 30, wide-shouldered, hands bleached and cracked from lye until the creases show white, and she talks to you because you listen, and because you helped her carry a basket up the water stairs without being asked. She's not what you'd think, Bess says, her voice under the slap and ring of wet cloth. Not like the last one. The last one, Anne Boleyn, dead a year and a half now, sword struck on Tower Green, and even laundresses drop their voices to say her name. That one filled a room, laughing, quarrelling, French this, French that. This one, Bess rings a sheet and the grey water runs over her wrists. This one is quiet. Bound to obey and serve, that's her motto, and she means it. Keeps her ladies sewing. Proper sewing, mind, shirts for the poor, none of your dancing till dawn. Strict about dress. Made the ladies wear proper hoods, none of the French fashion. A gable hood, English, hiding every hair. You've seen the style on merchants' wives, stiff and heavy as a little house worn on the head. Some of the young ones hate her for it. But I'll tell you this, Bess stops ringing. When the North rose last winter, the Great Rebellion, the pilgrimage, you'll remember, she went down on her knees to the king before the whole court and begged him to restore the abbeys. Begged him in front of everyone. What did he do? Told her to get up and mind her own business. Reminded her. Bess's voice goes down to almost nothing, and her eyes move to the door and back. Reminded her what happened to the last queen who meddled. The words sit in the cold air between you. You look down at your hands. She never asked for anything again, Bess says, except mercy for other people, small and quiet when she could, and now she's given him his son, and God's paying her wages. She picks up the rung sheet and snaps it flat with a crack like a sail. That's the way of it for women, girl. The work gets done and the worker gets buried. Learn to sew fast. You'll think about that sentence for the rest of your life. The work gets done and the worker gets buried. On the evening of the 23rd of October, the summons comes and the night work begins. You know something has changed before anyone says a word because the palace itself changes. You've been inside it 4 days now, long enough to know its normal noise, and understand a Tudor palace is never quiet. It rumbles day and night like a mill, hooves in the base court, barrels rolling, the armoury clatter of the kitchens, dogs' bells, 600 voices. But that evening, around the time the light dies, a hush starts somewhere near the royal lodgings and spreads outward through the courtyards like cold coming off ice. Grooms stop shouting. Somebody silences a dog. The chapel bell begins to toll, not ring toll, single strokes with silence between them, the sound of praying for the sick. And through the wardrobe court window you see torches moving along the gallery that leads to the Queen's side, many torches moving fast. The wardrobe clerk comes himself with a candle lantern, and his face tells you before his mouth does. Her Grace has been given her rights, he says. The Bishop of Carlisle is with her. Her brother is sent for from London. He sets the lantern down on the trestle with a small click that sounds enormous. The Lord Chamberlain's office bids you begin. The black work. All of you, all night if your eyes hold. It is still. He stops, chooses the words like a man stepping on river ice. It is still only prudence. But begin. The locked room is opened. You will remember the smell of that room until you die. Cold brick, lamp oil and dye. Black broadcloth in bulk has its own smell, bitter and faintly metallic. Good black is the most expensive of all dyed cloth. Did you know that? True black, not the brownish-greenish blacks the poor wear. Cloth dipped once and called dun, but caught black, dyed woad blue first and then over-dyed with madder and galls again and again until the colour goes down into the wool like night going down into water. It costs more than scarlet. Kings ransom themselves in black, and the galls and the iron in the dye leave that smell, sour sharp, like ink, like old coins, like something that was once alive and has been made very serious. Stacked to the ceiling, bolts and bolts and bolts of it. In the candlelight the room seems to drink the flame. Black cloth gives nothing back, and 11 women stand in the doorway looking at a darkness that has been folded and rolled and stored against this night, and nobody says anything, because what is there to say that isn't treason or prayer? Then Mistress Vaughan claps her hands once softly and says, "Cutting first. Cecily, candles. Beg, borrow, or steal. Wax if they'll give it. Tallow if they won't. Go." And the machine starts. Here is what the world asks of you now, and I want you to feel the size of it. When a Queen of England dies, the court goes into mourning, all of it. The king's household and the queen household, the great lords, the officers, the gentlemen, the yeomen, the grooms, the children of the chapel choir, down and down and down. For the funeral itself, the accounts will eventually record black cloth issued for well over 1,000 mourners, graded by rank with the precision of a battle plan. So many yards of such a quality for a duke, fewer and coarser for a knight, coarser again for a yeoman, down to the poor men. And there will be poor men, by design, will come to them, who receive gowns of the cheapest black with hoods, because their job is to carry torches and pray, and even their poverty must be dressed. Cloaks, gowns, hoods. The mourning hood is its own garment, a deep draped thing that shadows the whole face, and every single one is cut and sewn by hand. Trappings for horses, banners to be edged, the Queen's own chamber, chapel, and hearse to be hung with black. Hundreds of yards, hemmed every yard, because a raw edge frays and a frayed edge before the eyes of kings is somebody's disgrace, possibly yours. There are no machines. Understand that in your bones. Every stitch that will clothe this kingdom's grief comes off a needle held in fingers, one stitch at a time, and there are perhaps 40 pairs of hands at Hampton Court that can do it to the standard required, and the calendar has already decided how long you have. You run for candles. The chandlery gives you tallow, and you smell it before you're back across the court. Tallow candles are rendered animal fat, mutton mostly, and they burn with a hot, meaty, slightly rancid smell, and a smoke that grimes everything. And by midnight the cutting room smells of ink and burnt fat and 11 working women, and the tallow smoke is settling greasy on your skin, and your eyes sting, and the shears go through broad cloth. With a sound like a slow tearing sigh, again and again and again. You sew until the second candle drowns in its own fat. Your part is hoods. Mistress Vaughan sets you to hoods because hoods hang next to faces, and your stitching bears looking at. The wool is dense and hard-fulled, and pushing a needle through 4 thicknesses of it takes real force. You brace the needle's eye against the little brass thimble ring on your middle finger, and drive it with your whole hand, and the fabric resists and gives 20 times a minute, hour upon hour. By the small hours there is a bruise blooming under the thimble. The gold eye comes off on your damp fingertips and stains the creases of your knuckles grey. Your neck sets like mortar. Your eyes make halos around the candle flames. And in all those hours across the dark courtyards, in a room you will never enter, a woman your mother's age when she died is fighting for breath, and her ladies are holding her hands, and the finest physicians in England are doing the things that pass for medicine, and understand what that means in 1537. They are checking her urine against a chart. They are debating whether to bleed a woman who has already bled. They are burning sweet herbs against bad air. Childbed fever, we'd call it now. Bacteria in the birth canal. Sepsis climbing into the blood. An infection a course of tablets would end in a week. There is not a man in that room who knows what a bacterium is. There will not be for 300 years. They have Latin, astrology and prayer, and they're using all 3, and none of it is any use at all. Toward dawn, Bess Harding puts her head into the cutting room. She's been up all night too. The sick room eats linen, sheets soaked through with sweat faster than they can be changed. Nobody asks. She answers anyway, very quietly. Still with us, sleeping, they say, a breath. The king's not gone hunting. He was to go to Esher today. He's stayed. The king has stayed. Somehow that one detail frightens you more than the tolling bell. Henry VIII does not sit still. The whole kingdom knows it. He hunts the way other men breathe. And now he is somewhere in this palace, sitting still, waiting, and the whole vast machine waits around him, and you drive the needle through the black wool, and outside the window the sky over the wardrobe court turns the colour of a healing bruise, and somewhere a single ordinary blackbird starts to sing as if this were an ordinary day. The 24th of October. She holds through it. Word moves through the palace hour by hour. Worse, then a little better, then worse. In the afternoon, you hear, her confessor is with her again. By evening the whisper is that the Privy Council has been at the palace all day, that letters have gone to London, that her brother Edward Seymour walks the gallery outside her rooms and will speak to no one. That night no one pretends to sleep. The workroom candles stay lit. Around midnight the chapel fills. You can hear the singing faint across 2 courtyards. The King's own chapel choir, the finest voices in England, singing into the dark for her. You sew. What else is there? Your stitches and their psalms are the same thing that night. Small human things sent up against the enormous dark, over and over, because the hands must do something while the heart waits. Between midnight and 2, the singing stops. You hear the difference the way you'd feel a missing stair. The palace holds one long breath. Then, far off, doors, voices, a woman's cry, cut short, a sound with a hand pressed over it. Torches again in the long gallery, moving without hurry now, because there is no longer anything to hurry for. The chapel bell begins to toll again, and this time it doesn't stop between strokes and start again. It goes on, slow, even, 1 and 1 and 1 and 1. Mistress Vaughan sets down her shears. She crosses herself. Old habit, careful habit. In this New England you cross yourself carefully. And around the room, 1 by 1, 11 needles stop. God rest her soul, Mistress Vaughan says. Queen Jane is dead. She was 28 years old, or near it. No one wrote down the day she was born. No one writes down the birthdays of gentry daughters who aren't expected to matter. She had been queen for 1 year and 5 months. Her son was 12 days old, and in the silence after the words, you become aware of a terrible, practical, unforgivable thought rising through your grief like a bubble through water, and you look around the room and see the same thought arriving on every tired face, because every woman in this room is made of the same working clay as you. Now the real sewing begins. Here is what happens to a queen's body in 1537. And I promise you nobody at court is squeamish about it, because they can't afford to be. She dies at Hampton Court in the small hours of the 24th of October. Some will write the 25th. Even the dates blur in the exhaustion of that week, and the official account will settle on the night of the 24th. And from the moment her breath stops, she stops being a woman and becomes a problem of statecraft, ceremony and chemistry. Because a queen cannot simply be buried. A queen must lie in state. She must be seen by her household, by the great, by God's officers, lying in honour with candles and watches and masses for days, weeks, as it will turn out, nearly 3 weeks from her death to her burial on the 12th of November. And a body does not wait 3 weeks on its own, not even in a cold English autumn. So the first people summoned to her chamber after the priests are not poets. They are the wax chandler and the plumber and the apothecary's men. You learn this from Bess, and from a soft-spoken groom of the chandlery called Walt Piers, who becomes, over the coming days, the third leg of your little stool of friendship in this vast place. Walt is 19, big-handed, gentle as a cart horse, and his trade is wax. Candles, tapers, torches, and the other uses of wax that nobody thinks about until a great one dies. It was chandlery men who carried the seared cloth to the Queen's chamber. Cerecloth, linen soaked in molten wax, sometimes with resin and spices worked in. The women who watched her in life wash her body for the last time. Her own ladies do this. It is their privilege and their grief. No strange hands touch a queen. And then she is wrapped, limb by limb, in that waxed linen, wound close and sealed, the warm wax moulding to her, closing her away from the air. The apothecary's bill will show the spices. It is the old dry way of keeping the dead, older than embalming with knives, gentler, the way reserved for those whose bodies are considered too sacred to open, though the surgeons do their quiet work too that week. The accounts pay them without describing what they did, and you find you don't want to know. Then lead. The plumber's men cast and solder a shell of lead around the seared queen, a conforming coffin of metal sealed with hot iron and solder. You smell it even in the wardrobe court that day, the sharp candle-flame smell of melted solder drifting on the wind with the incense, and the lead goes inside a chest of oak, and the oak is covered. With what? With black velvet and a cross of white, and it is somebody's hands that make that covering fit, that turn those corners, that stitch that cross straight. Not your hands. That work goes to the king's own tailors. But the room the coffin lies in, the chamber of presence where she will lie those first days with her ladies kneeling around her in shifts, day and night, and tapers burning at her head and feet. That room is being hung with black, floor to ceiling, and banners of arms pinned against the black, and there are simply not enough of the king's tailors to hem the world in a week. So on the morning after she dies, a gentleman usher of the Queen's chamber comes to the wardrobe court, and he looks at the assembled needlewomen with eyes that haven't closed in 2 days, and he says, "Which of you does Mistress Vaughan trust for close work in the upper rooms?" And Mistress Vaughan says, "Cecily, and myself." And that is how a net mender's daughter from Bermondsey comes to climb the stair to the Queen's side of Hampton Court, with a housewife of needles on her belt, and her heart going like a fist on a door. You want to know what it's like up there. Everyone always wants to know what it's like up there. It's warmer. That's the first thing your body notices before your eyes have taken anything in. The air changes on the stair itself, because up here there are fires in every room and wax candles, not tallow. Remember, you know candles now. You've been squinting through tallow smoke for a week, and wax burns clean and sweet, faintly honeyed, and the difference between a tallow room and a wax room is the difference between a cowshed and a church. Underfoot, rush matting woven fine, laid wall to wall, so that footsteps go soft and the whole floor smells faintly of cut hay. The walls, where they aren't already being covered in black, are hung with tapestry, and you have never stood close to real arras before, and it stops you like a hand on your chest. Wool and silk and actual gold thread. Gold you could scrape with a fingernail, woven into stories 12 feet high. Warm colours, crowded figures. King David. Abraham. The gold catches the candlelight and moves, and over it all the black is going up. Trestles and ladders, yeomen holding bolts overhead while tailors' men pin and tack, whole walls of tapestry, a king's ransom of gold thread, vanishing behind plain black cloth, because that is what mourning means here. The palace itself closes its eyes. Mirrors would be covered if mirrors hung here. Instead, they cover glory. By the end of the week, the Queen's side has become a sequence of black rooms, room after room after room of soft candle-lit darkness, like walking down the throat of night, and at the end of the sequence in the chamber of presence, on a trestle bier under a canopy, her, you are never alone in that room. Understand that. You're never within 5 yards of the coffin, and you would never be. There is an etiquette to grief as strict as any dance, and your place in it is at the walls, at the hems, kneeling at the skirting with your needle while the great mourn in the middle of the room. But you are in the room. On the second day of the lying in state, you kneel in the corner of the chamber of presence for 4 hours, whipping the hem of the black hanging where it puddles against the matting, invisible, while 6 feet away the Queen's ladies keep their watch. The coffin, under its pall of black velvet and cloth of gold, tapers as tall as men at the 4 corners, their flames absolutely still in the closed air. The smell of the room, beeswax, incense, real frankincense, resinous and churchy and dark, and under it the cold stone and cloth smell of a great room in autumn, and under that nothing. No smell of death. The wax and lead have done their work. The chandler and the plumber have made her tidy for God. Her ladies kneel in relays around the bier, black-gowned, white-faced within their hoods. Some tell beads. One, no older than you, cries without any sound at all for the entire time you're in the room. You can see her shoulders doing it, a small steady shudder like something mechanical. And no one comforts her, because everyone is doing their own weeping or their own refusing to weep, and comfort would break the surface of the ceremony, and the ceremony is the only thing holding anyone upright. And here is what undoes you. Kneeling at your hem in the corner, not the coffin, not the incense. It's a detail of etiquette you learn afterward from Bess. For the first days before the month's mind settles into its long rhythm, the watchers by custom include the Queen's own chamber women, the ones who dressed her, who warmed her smocks by the fire, who brushed out her fair hair, which everyone says was her beauty, pale gold and fine, the women whose hands knew her, and they kneel there hour after hour beside a sealed box, and their hands, which used to have all that work, that intimate endless work of another body, have nothing left to do but hold beads. The work gets done and the worker gets buried. But it's worse than Bess said, you think, driving your needle along the hem, eyes down, throat aching. Sometimes the work itself dies, and the hands are left alive with nothing to hold. You finish the hem, you're led out backward, you don't turn your back on the presence, even now, even hers. On the stair, Mistress Vaughan looks at your face and does something she has never done in 3 years. She puts her hand flat on your back, between your shoulders, for a moment. Says nothing. That's the whole of it. You go back down to the wardrobe court and pick up the next hood and sew until the light goes. The palace, meanwhile, is doing something strange above and around you, and I want you to see both halves of it at once, because the 2 halves together are the whole truth of this place. Half of it is grief, and the grief is real. Don't let anyone tell you it wasn't. The king has gone. Did you know that? Henry, this huge, terrifying red and gold man whom you've still never once seen with your own eyes, and now never will, not here, left Hampton Court almost at once, the day after she died, and shut himself up at Windsor, at Whitehall, moved, restless even in mourning, because the word goes, he cannot abide the place. He, who buried nothing for Catherine, and killed Anne, wears black for Jane, and will wear it for 3 months, and the shortest version of the truth is the one the whole court repeats in a whisper like a charm. Of all his wives she is the only one he mourned. He ordered masses. He would write years on that she was his true wife. He will, at the end of his own life a decade from now, choose to be buried beside her and no one else. Whatever that man's heart was, and God alone ever mapped that country, something in it broke that week, in its own way, and the palace felt it the way a house feels weather. And the other half is administration, and the administration is glorious and monstrous, and it does not pause for 1 hour. Because a state funeral in 1537 is one of the largest logistical undertakings the kingdom knows how to perform. A coronation in a minor key. The Duke of Norfolk is put at the head of it. Garter, King of Arms, and the heralds are set to work out the order of every procession to the last groom, because precedence is law here, and putting a Viscount's horse before an Earl's would be an incident men remembered for a decade. Letters go out under seal. To the Lord Mayor of London bidding solemn masses at Paul's, to the lords and ladies summoned to attend, to the officers of Windsor, because it has been decided, the King has decided, that she will not lie in Westminster among the old kings, but at Windsor, in St. George's Chapel, in the choir, in a vault opened new in the floor. The King's works at Windsor begin breaking sacred pavement with iron bars, while her body still lies at Hampton Court, and through it all, through your window, day after day, the ordinary supply barges keep coming up the river. Fish for the household, wood for the fires, 600 people still eat twice a day. A 12-day-old prince, the whole point of everything, the small red reason for all of it, feeds and sleeps and is watched every second by an entire staff sworn and resworn, in rooms scrubbed by order twice a day, because the king has already lost too much this month and the boy is not permitted to be mortal. You see the prince once, at a distance, in the second week. A procession of nurses and rockers crossing the base court in the thin sun, the child a bundle of white and gold in the arms of the lady mistress, yeomen before and behind. The whole court within sight stops and uncovers. Grooms kneel in the mud, and you look at that bundle 60 feet away and think a thought so simple it hurts. She never got to carry him anywhere. 12 days, and most of them fevered. He was carried to his christening by other people, past her daybed, and back out again. The bundle goes in out of the cold. The court covers its heads. The work resumes. And the work. Let me tell you honestly about the work now, because the second week is where it stops being dramatic and becomes what most history actually is. Bodies wearing out quietly indoors. You sow, in the last fortnight of October and the first days of November, from the hour you can see until long after you can't, by candlelight that ruins eyes a decade before their time. The hoods are done, now it's gowns for the poor men, cut generous, sewn plain, but sewn. And then yards, yards, yards of hanging hems, and then horse trappings, which are the worst of all. Coarse, heavy stuff, sewn double for strength, and the needle has to be dragged through with a leather palm guard, and the seams are as long as the room, and by the end of a trapping your right hand won't fully open, the fingers curling back toward the needle's shape on their own like a plant toward a light. Your body keeps an account book of it. The bruise under your thimble goes green, then settles into a callus. The gall dye works into the cracks of your knuckles until your hands look, in candlelight, like they belong to a woman of 40. There's a spot between your right shoulder blade and your spine that burns like a small coal by mid-afternoon, every afternoon. Your eyes ache at their inner corners. When you finally lie down at night, your hands go on sewing without you, twitching through phantom stitches, and behind your closed eyes the black cloth scrolls past forever. And sometimes you jerk awake certain you've dropped a stitch in a hem that exists only in your dream. and you are lucky, and you know it. And that's the strangest part. You are warm, warmish, fed, truly fed, paid 8p a day from the Great Wardrobe account, which is more than double what you're worth in Cheapside, and Mistress Vaughan lets you keep a penny of every day's wage for your own. And the pennies not into your spare hose like small cold hopes. Girls you grew up with are gutting fish in Bermondsey in the wind off the river. You kneel on rush matting in a palace sowing the grief of a queen, and your worst enemies are your own eyes and the ache in your hand. You'd be almost ashamed of your good fortune if the room upstairs would let you forget what bought it. There is one night in that first week you have to live through with me, 'cause it's the night the palace shows you both its faces at once. It's the 26th or the 27th. The days have started melting into each other, marked only by which garment is in your lap. And it's past midnight, and you are awake because a message came down at 11. A valance on the hearse frame being built in the chapel has torn on a workman's spike, and it must be whole by morning when the bishops come, and the tailor's men are all asleep on their feet, and someone said the silk woman's girl is quick. So you go, with your housewife of needles and a boy with a lantern, across 3 dark courtyards, and the cold is the serious kind now, the kind that gets into the hinges of you, and the sky between the chimneys is hard with stars, and your breath goes up in the lantern light like a soul in a wall painting. The Chapel Royal at midnight is another world from the chapel by day. By day it is ceremony, by night it is industry. The great hearse is half built, a skeleton of timber rearing over the place where the coffin will stand, and around it the wax men are working, Walt among them, sleeves rolled, forearms shining, setting and trimming tapers by the dozen, and the smell of the place is overwhelming, hot wax and raw timber and stone-cold incense, sweetness layered on sweetness until it is almost a taste. The ceiling above the working lanterns is the famous one, blue as midnight and studded with gilded stars, so that you are working under 2 skies at once, the real one outside and this made one above, and both of them looking down at a torn valance and a tired girl. The tier is a hand's length, on the bias, the worst kind. A bias tear wants to grow. It pulls itself wider with every touch, like some arguments, and you kneel on the scaffold boards and pin it small, working from the ends toward the middle the way you were taught, trapping the tear's ambition between your pins before you let the needle argue with it. Fine herringbone on the back to marry the edges, then a couched cord laid over the seam on the face so the mend reads as ornament. Make the mend look meant. Mistress Vaughan's law. Half of mastery in any trade you already suspect is making the mend look meant. You are 20 minutes into it, deep in the tunnel of concentration where the world is 1 inch of black wool, when Walt says quietly from his ladder, "Mind your flame." You look up. The boy with your lantern has drifted, half asleep on his feet, and the lantern has swung close to the hearse frame, close to a swag of dry buckram and paper laid up ready for covering. And even as you look, the corner of the buckram gives off 1 bright thread of smoke. You don't remember deciding. You are simply there, 2 steps, and you smother the corner flap between your 2 bare palms, and there's a hiss and a small bright bite of pain, and it's out. It was nothing. A breath of char, a scorch the size of a penny, gone before it was born, but your heart is going like a hammer, and the boy is white, and Walt is down the ladder with a wet cloth for your hands, and nobody says the thing everyone is thinking, which is what it would have been. A chapel dressed in tinder, hung floor to vault in cloth, forested with candles, over the body of the Queen of England in a palace of timber and paint at midnight. Whole churches have gone that way, whole streets. Fire is the other death that stalks this century, the fast one, the one that doesn't need a fever, and every craft in this palace lives with it the way you live with a sharp tool, respected, never trusted. Wax men watch flame, Walt says at last, rapping your palms more shaken than his voice admits. All of us, all night, every night, till she's buried. That's the half of the trade nobody sees. Any fool can light a candle. We're paid to watch it. He ties off the cloth and looks up at the half-built hearse, the hundreds of empty spikes waiting for their tapers. Come the funeral, there'll be more fire burning over her in that chapel than in any room in England. And nothing will happen, 'cause we'll be standing in the dark at the edges, watching. You'll not even see us. You'll not even see us. The motto of everyone in this story, you think. The palms of your hands sting for 3 days, a tight, shiny tenderness where the skin's scorched, and every stitch of that week has a little pain in it, and you never tell Mistress Vaughan how you got it. And the mended valance hangs on the hearse through every mass looking exactly like ornament, and only you and Walt and one mortified lantern boy ever know. The Queen's funeral was one drifting half-asleep step from being a different story entirely. That's the first face of the palace that night. The work, the danger, the watching. The second face you see on your way back across the courts, near 2 in the morning, and it stops you in a doorway with your heart in your mouth. Torches at the privy stairs, the river gate, boats. You press back into the shadow. Instinct. The invisible survive by staying invisible. And you watch, across the width of one dark courtyard, a party come down to the water, yeomen with torches, gentlemen muffled in black, and in the middle of them a man so tall and so broad that he makes the men around him look like boys, moving heavily, a stick in one hand though he leans on no one, black from head to foot, torchlight sliding across him as he passes so that he appears and disappears, appears and disappears. You have never seen him before. You will never see him again. But there is no one else in the world he could be. The king is leaving Hampton Court, quietly, at night, by water, days after her death. He could not abide the place, the word will run, and the word for once is true. And there is no ceremony to it at all. That's what fixes you to the doorpost. No trumpets, no kneeling crowds, nothing but tide and torches and a huge man in black, stepping down into a barge with the care of a man whose legs pain him, going away from the palace where his son sleeps guarded and his wife lies coffined, because he cannot be under the same roofs as both those facts. The barge pushes off. The torches go out onto the black river, a little constellation, dwindling. The oars are muffled. Even the water is discreet, and you stand in your doorway with your scorched hands throbbing, 16 years old, holding the sight nobody meant you to have, the most feared man in England running away in the dark from a griefy order dressed in 800 yards of your stitching. You never tell anyone that either. Your hem is not the only place you keep things sewn shut. By morning the palace speaks of it openly. The King's Grace is removed to Westminster, and the machine adjusts, letters redirected, offices shifted, and the work goes on as if the heart of the house had not left it in the night. And in a way the work is easier after, and everyone feels it, though no one says it. The terrible gravity has gone off down the river, and what's left at Hampton Court is simpler. A dead woman, a living child, and 1,000 people getting them both, stitch by stitch and candle by candle, safely into the future. On the last day of October, they move her from the Chamber of Presence to the chapel, and you see your first piece of the great ceremony, and it teaches you what the next 2 weeks are going to be. It happens at night. Much of this will happen at night. Remember that. The Tudor way of death loves the dark, torches, the theatre of flame, and the procession from the presence chamber to the chapel royal is short in distance, a matter of galleries and stairs, and enormous in weight. You're not in it. You're pressed with the other workfolk into the corner of a courtyard along the route, kneeling on stone that pulls the heat out of your knees in the first minute, and you watch it pass above and before you like a dream someone else is having. Torches first, then the cross, and the chapel children singing, their voices thin and pure in the cold, the sound rising off them like breath smoke, then heralds in their stiff coats of arms, bright as playing cards even at night, then the coffin borne by gentlemen, the pall of black velvet with its white cross catching torchlight along its folds, and on top of the pall, and this stops your breath, an image of her. You didn't know about this. Nobody told you. It is the custom for royal funerals, and it will strike you to the end of your days as the strangest, most haunting custom you ever saw. A wooden effigy, carved and painted to the life, dressed in the Queen's own robes of state, crown on its head, sceptre in its hand, rings on its jointed wooden fingers, lying on the coffin lid with its eyes open, made in days by the King's carvers and painters, working, like you, day and night, meant to show what cannot be shown, the body politic, the Queen who does not die even when the woman does. In the torchlight moving past you at shoulder height, its painted face flickers and seems, for one appalling heartbeat to breathe. Every knee in the courtyard is on the stone, every head bare. The torch flames lean and straighten in the small wind, and the smoke rolls low, tarry and hot in the cold air, and the singing passes on into the chapel, and behind the coffin come the mourners, her ladies first, and at their head, walking as chief mourner in a train of black. A girl. You know who she is. Everyone knows who she is, though for years it was safer not to say her name too warmly. The Lady Mary, the King's elder daughter, 21 years old, small, grave, short-sighted. She holds her head with the particular stillness of people who can't see far and won't squint. Catherine of Aragon's daughter, who was stripped of her title, banished from her father's sight, bullied for 3 years to sign away her own mother's marriage and her own legitimacy. And it was Jane, the word runs Quiet Jane, who worked on the king week after week to bring Mary back to court, who sat her near the royal table again, who gave her back something like a family. Whatever Jane was or wasn't, she was kind to this girl when kindness cost something. And now Mary walks behind her coffin. As chief mourner, the king does not walk. Kings do not attend their consorts' funerals. That is the custom. Grief is delegated. And Mary will kneel at the head of that coffin through mass after mass in the coming days, and will pay from her own purse for masses for Jane's soul, and you watch her pass, 6 feet from your cold knees, and her face under the black hood is not weeping. It is set. It is the face of someone doing the last thing they can do for one of the few people who was ever good to them, and doing it perfectly, because perfection is the only language grief speaks here. You go back to the workroom that night and so until 2, and nobody talks much, and the image's painted face floats in the candle flames. Now the palace enters the long middle, and I'll be honest with you because this story is honest or it's nothing. The long middle of a royal death is boredom of a heavy, sacred, exhausting kind. From the 1st of November, All Saints, the whole chapel blazing, every voice in the choir. Through the 11th, the Queen lies in the chapel royal under her hearse. A hearse, in your century, is not a cart. Learn the word as you learned it, standing in the chapel doorway with a basket of hemmed frontals. It is a great frame of timber built over the coffin like the skeleton of a small building, tiered, spiked, and every spike carries a candle, and the whole thing is hung with black valances, your valances, some of them, your hems, and fringed and plumed, and it burns. Dozens upon dozens of tapers, day and night, a slow constellation over the dead, and wax runs and is renewed, and Walt and the chandlery men tend it like stokers, and the chapel air goes thick and golden dark with wax smoke and incense until breathing it feels like drinking something. Masses every day, dirges every evening, her ladies keeping their watches in rotation, kneeling hour on hour. And this is where you truly learn what her women are made of, because it is November, and the chapel is stone, and the kneeling is real. Night watches in the cold, with the candles breathing around them, and not one of those gentlewomen, so far as the palace ever hears, asks to be excused. 12 days of it. You're in and out of that chapel a dozen times with mended things and new things, and the picture that stays with you forever isn't the hearse. It's this, a countess kneeling at the coffin's foot at 6 a.m, fast asleep, upright, beads in her fingers, chin sunk to her chest, out cold, kneeling, the body keeping the vow after the mind has gone. A herald on watch sees her, and does not wake her, and shifts his own stance to stand a little nearer, so that if she topples, she'll topple against him and not the stone. Grief here is a duty roster, and somehow that makes it more moving, not less. Anyone can weep when the feeling takes them. These people have organised their weeping into shifts, and they are performing love as labour, hour after cold hour, the same way you are performing it in thread. It's in this long middle that you get your one strange gift, the thing you will never tell anyone in the palace, the thing I can tell you now. It comes through Bess in the 2nd week. She finds you at your board and stands over you, turning something in her cracked fingers, awkward as a girl. "You did me that kindness on the water stairs," she says, "and you've a face that doesn't blab, so." She puts it down on the black wool in front of you. The Queen's chamber women had the giving out of some of her small things, the humble stuff, mind, the stuff beneath the accounts. Her Grace had a bag of sewing bits she used with her own hands, for the poor shirts she made her ladies sew. Wenches like us don't figure in wills. But Mistress Jaskin had the sorting of it, and she owed me for a matter of a stained kirtle I made vanish once. And I said, "There's a little sempstress below who's sewn herself half blind for the Queen's honour, and never seen her face. So, it is a needle case. Bone, small as your thumb, screw-topped, yellowed with handling, a hairline crack down one side. Inside, 3 needles of different sizes and a coil of white linen thread. Hers, used by her. The Queen of England pushed these needles through the coarse shirts of poor men with her own fingers, sitting among her ladies in the rooms above you, being plain and dutiful and strict, bound to obey and serve, while the court sniggered at her dowdiness, and the needles are worn bright at the eye the way only long use wears them. I can't, you start, and Bess says, "You can. Who else should have it, girl? A duchess? Duchesses got her jewels. This is the part of her that was like us. It goes to one of us, or it goes in the midden." You close your hand around the bone case, and it is warm from Bess's fingers, and something comes up your throat that you push back down, because the workroom is full and your eyes are needed for the seam. That night you unpick 3 inches of the hem of your own cloak, slide the needle case inside against the wool, and sew it shut with your smallest stitches. 14 to the inch, even in the dark, hunger taught you. You are not stealing, it was given. But you have learned enough of great houses now to know that given and allowed are different countries, and that the safest place for a treasure is inside a seam, and the safest witness is nobody. It rides there against your shoulder for the rest of this story. You will feel it sometimes, a small hard line in the cloth like a bone in a fish. Remember it's there. It matters later. And then, suddenly, the middle is over, and the machine changes gear, and everything you've sewn for 3 weeks stands up and gets on the road. The 12th of November, 1537, Burial Day. But the procession, the great procession from Hampton Court to Windsor, that is the day before and the day itself, and the palace turns itself inside out to launch it, and you're up at 4 in the morning on the last day, sewing by lantern light in the base court itself, because of course, at the very end there are trappings that don't fit. Picture the base court an hour before dawn on a freezing November morning. 200 horses, torch smoke and breath smoke and the smell of horse and leather and cold iron. Grooms buckling black trappings over animals who stamp and swing their quarters and don't care whose funeral it is. And a trapper sewn for 1 horse never quite fits another, and 3 of them came up short over the crupper, and someone shouted for needlewomen, and so here you are, on your knees in the horse-dung dark with a leather palm and a curved packing needle, taking a seam out and letting cloth down while the horse above you shifts its enormous warm weight from foot to foot, and its groom holds its head and murmurs to it, and you work 6 inches from a hind leg that could kill you absent-mindedly. The cold makes your fingers stupid. You warm them under the trapper against the horse's flank. The animal is like a stove, and it turns its head and watches you do it with one liquid black eye and huffs, and the groom laughs quietly, the first laugh you've heard in this palace in days. She likes you, he says. She'd like anybody warm, you say, and stitch, and the sky over the gatehouse turns from black to iron to the grey of old pewter, and one by one the horses are led away finished, and the last seam is closed at full light, and you stand up and your knees crack like green wood, and there it all is. The procession, forming. Nothing you have seen, not the chapel, not the hearse, not the effigy in the torchlight, has prepared you for the scale of it in daylight. It stretches out of the base court, through the gates, onto the road, and it is still growing. 200 poor men. There's your plain sewing walking, in black gowns and hoods, each carrying a long torch, to go before and behind and line the way, because the prayers of the poor are held to reach God fastest, and a queen goes to her grave on a road paved with paupers' prayers, and every one of those men will be fed and paid and owns, as of this week, the warmest garment of his life, your stitches on their backs. You find you can pick out your own work at 40 feet. That hood sits right. That one's Mistress Vaughan's, that gown's hem is the widow of Suffolk's. She turns her corners wide, and it is the strangest pride you've ever felt, pride with tears standing in it. Then the chariot. The Queen's coffin comes down from the chapel borne by gentlemen, and is set upon a chariot drawn by 6 horses trapped in black. You know the exact weight of what those horses are wearing. Your right hand still won't fully open because of it. And upon the coffin, the effigy again, riding in the cold morning light now, crowned, painted, open-eyed, her sceptre in her wooden hand, and in daylight it does not look alive. In daylight it looks like exactly what it is, an idol of a dead woman made by exhausted craftsmen in a hurry, and somehow that is worse and truer, and you cannot look away from it. Banners at the four corners of the chariot, borne by lords on horseback, the heralds, the great cross, the clergy in their copes, gold thread flashing against all that black like fish turning in dark water, and behind the chariot the Lady Mary, chief mourner still, riding a horse trapped in black velvet, and after her the ladies of the court by rank, 2 by 2, a river of black on black horses, and the gentlemen, and the officers, and the guard, until the count of mourners passes anything you can number, and you simply stand with the other workfolk by the gate, bareheaded in the cold, watching the black river flow out of the red palace under a pewter sky. Somewhere in the middle of it all the trumpets are silent. That's what you notice at the very end, the detail your ears keep snagging on. A royal procession without fanfare. Just hooves. Hundreds and hundreds of hooves on the frozen road, and the shuffle of the poor men's feet, and torch flames guttering pale in daylight, and the bells, Hampton's bell behind, and then, faint across the fields, the bells of the next parish taking it up, and the next, because every church tower between here and Windsor will toll her past. Parish to parish, 7 miles of tolling, the sound handed along the valley of the Thames like a bucket down a chain. The tail of the procession clears the gate. The sound fades westward, and Mistress Vaughan, standing beside you with her arms folded into her sleeves, says the most human thing you will ever hear her say. Well, she's gone, and I could sleep for a year. A pause. We leave for Windsor within the hour. There's mending to follow the funeral. Get your needles. Because of course the needlewomen follow the funeral. Hems tear on the road. The story isn't over, and neither is the work. In this world, the work is never over. That's the last lesson of the trade, and you're about to learn it in the one place in England even stranger than the palace you're leaving. You go to Windsor by water with the baggage. The procession takes the road, slow as law, pausing at Colnbrook, at Eton, receiving the honours of every town it passes, but cloth and work folk and the 100 small necessities of ceremony go by barge, and so you spend that grey afternoon on the river again, wedged between hampers, watching the bare willows slide past, and it is the first time in 3 weeks that your hands have had nothing in them. They don't know what to do. Your hands! They lie in your lap, twitching faintly like sleeping dogs. You look at them as if they belong to someone else. The grey-stained knuckles, the callus under the thimble finger, the fine cracks at the fingertips where the cold and the wool have opened the skin along the whorls, so that your own fingerprints have become a map of little red rivers. Bess, who came down to the water stairs to see the wardrobe party off, pressed a lump of something wrapped in linen into your hand at parting. Mutton fat boiled with beeswax and a little rose-water, her own receipt. Work it in at night or your hands'll be 40 before you are, she said, and come find me when you're back in London. Anyone in the Whitehall laundries can say where Bess Harding is. And then, gruff, looking at the river instead of you. You did well here, little needle. She'd have liked your hems. She'd have liked your hems. 4 words, and you had to turn away and pretend the wind had got in your eyes. Windsor comes up out of the dusk like a cliff. If Hampton Court is a palace pretending to be a dream, Windsor is a fortress that has stopped pretending anything. Grey stone piled on a chalk hill above the river, the great round tower squatting over it all, walls that were old when the king's grandfather's grandfather was young. 450 years of kings back to the conqueror. The barge puts in below the town and you climb a cobbled lane between overhanging houses, and the whole town is full. Grooms seeking stabling, gentlemen servants seeking beds, torchlight in every doorway, the taverns roaring quietly. If a roar can be quiet, the particular subdued din of 1,000 people arrived for a funeral and needing supper. The procession is lodged for the night. The Queen's body rests this last night at Windsor in the chapel. Tomorrow, the burial. You sleep, 4 hours, on a pallet in a loft over a saddler's shop requisitioned for the wardrobe, and before dawn you're inside the castle's lower ward, and there is St. George's Chapel, and you stop walking. You thought you knew churches. You've stood in St. Paul's. But this is stone doing something stone shouldn't be able to do. The chapel fills one whole side of the ward, tall windows from waist height to heaven, buttresses flying, pinnacles crowded with carved beasts holding gilded veins, and in the grey-pink light of a November dawn, the whole eastern end glows faintly from within, because inside it, hundreds of candles are already burning, and the windows hand the light out into the morning like something being given away. Inside. You are inside for 1 hour before the great ones come, hurrying behind a yeoman with a basket of last-minute furnishings, and that hour prints itself on you forever. The ceiling. You walk with your head back like a fool. Stone fanned out overhead in spreading branches, ribs running up the pillars and opening like frost ferns on glass, like the underside of a forest done in pale stone, so high that the candle smoke hazes before it reaches it. This chapel was barely finished. Men still living carve those bosses. The king's father built much of it. The choir vault went up within living memory. The banners of the Knights of the Garter hang over the choir stalls in ranks of dusty colour, and below them every stall is crested with the helm and sword of a knight, and the brass plates of dead knights going back 100 years line the stall backs like scales. And in the middle of the choir floor, the hole. They have laid timber bulks and black cloth around it, and the hearse is built over it. A greater hearse even than Hampton's, wax enough to light a town. But between the candles and the black there is a rectangle of dark and cut stone going down, and raw chalk earth smell rising, wet and mineral and cold, up into all that incense. The vault, opened in the floor of the choir by the king's command, before the high altar's steps in the most honourable ground in Windsor. The masons who cut it stand at the back of the chapel this morning in their best clothes, brushed and awkward, because they must attend to seal it after, and no one quite knows where masons stand in the order of precedence at a queen's funeral, so they have been put by a pillar and told to be invisible, and they are failing, because masons are the only people in this chapel who keep looking at the one thing everyone else's eyes slide off, the hole itself, their work, the last room anyone would ever build for her, and the smallest and the plainest and the only one she'd keep. Your work is small and quick, a torn valance mended, a fringe retacked where a ladder caught it, and then a yeoman is herding all workfolk out, because the hour has come. And here your luck holds one last time, the way it has held all through this story, the luck of the invisible. There is a space at the back of the chapel, behind the font, where the lesser officers of the wardrobe are permitted to stand. Someone must be at hand if a hanging falls. That's the fiction. And the fiction has room in it for a silk woman, and her apprentice pressed into the shadow of a pillar, still as the stone, watching the funeral of Jane Seymour from 60 feet away. I won't give you the whole 3 hours. Ceremony at this pitch is like the sea. Describing every wave tells you less than standing in one. But take these pieces, because they're the ones you keep. The sound of it. A requiem mass in a chapel built like an instrument. The choir of St. George's and the King's Own Chapel children together. And when the voices open up into the vault, the stone takes the sound and folds it back down over the congregation, so that you are not hearing the music so much as standing inside it, and the plain song passages move like slow water, and one boy's voice rides above everything in the Agnus Dei, effortless, inhuman, and you watch hard-faced lords who have signed death warrants stand with tears sliding openly into their beards, because that is what the music is for. It is a machine for opening people. 400 years later it still works. Some things don't change. The offering of the pulls, cloth of gold, borne up one by the great ladies and laid over the coffin, layer on layer, gold on gold, until the black is buried in it. The last gifts given as cloth, because in this world cloth is how honour is spoken. You knew that. You've spent 3 weeks inside that language. The Lady Mary, kneeling through it all at the head of the coffin, dead white, upright as a lance. She has ridden behind the body all the way from Hampton Court and knelt through every mass, and she will not sway now. And then the part that is not beautiful, the part that is only true, the effigy is lifted away, the pulls are folded back, the gentlemen take up the coffin. You can see the weight of the lead in the set of their shoulders, in the careful shuffling smallness of their steps, and it is borne to the edge of the vault, and there the ropes and rollers take it, handled by unseen men below, and the masons quietly come forward at last, and the coffin of Jane the Queen goes down out of the candlelight into the chalk dark, slowly, in a silence so complete you can hear the ropes breathe against the stone. And then the officers of her household break their staves. You didn't know about this custom either, and it takes your breath like cold water. Her chamberlain, her steward, the officers who bore white staves of office as the sign of their service, they come to the vault's edge one by one, and each man breaks his stave in his 2 hands, the crack of it shocking in the hush, and cast the pieces down into the grave onto the coffin. The service is ended. The household is dissolved. There is no queen to serve. Wood snapping, again, each crack a career, a livelihood, a life shape ending. Men who yesterday commanded hundreds standing over a hole in the floor, holding 2 halves of a broken stick and letting go. The work gets done, and the worker gets buried, and then the work itself is broken over the grave. Garter King of Arms cries her style and titles into the vault for the last time, and then cries the kings, and the living continue, because that is the whole engineering of ceremony. It walks you up to the edge of the pit, and then it turns you firmly by the shoulders back toward the world. The trumpets sound at last, for the living, for the king, for the prince. The great procession forms and files out into the thin November noon. The candles on the hearse are put out in banks, smoke rising through the fan vaulting in grey skeins, and the chapel empties, and at the very end, when it is only vergers and masons and workfolk, you hear the sound that actually ends the story of Jane Seymour on this earth. The masons mixing mortar, a shovel in sand and lime ringing softly on stone, scrape and slap and the tap of a maul settling the slab. workmen closing the floor over a woman whose motto was bound to obey and serve, while somewhere far above, faint through the walls, the bells of Windsor change from tolling to ringing, because England has no queen now, but England has a prince, and the future has to be rung in whether anyone's heart is ready or not. You stand behind the font next to Mistress Vaughan until the last note of the mortar trowel, and then she touches your sleeve, and you go out into the daylight, and the daylight is ordinary, and that's the thing no one warns you about great events. They end into ordinary daylight, and there are horses being led away, and men arguing about carts, and you are hungry, and being hungry feels like a betrayal, and happens anyway. You eat bread and hot pottage, sitting on a mounting block in the lower ward, and your breath smokes, and a raven. Windsor is full of ravens, big as cats, black as your 3 weeks of cloth, lands near your feet and regards you with a tilted head until you give it your crust, which Mistress Vaughan says is a waste of bread and does not stop you doing. That night, in the saddler's loft, you take out the mutton fat salve Bess gave you and work it into your cracked hands the way she said, and by the light of a rush dip you feel along the hem of your cloak until you find it, the small hard line of the bone needle case, riding safe in the seam. Hers. You press it once through the wool with your thumb, the way you'd touch a saint's relic, though you'd never say such a thing aloud in the King's New England. She sewed shirts for the poor. You sewed hoods for her mourning. It is the nearest the two of you will ever come to a conversation, that little case in your hem. 2 needlewomen, a queen and a net mender's daughter, and the whole vast pyramid of the world between them, and one small bone tube of needles passing quietly underneath it all from her hand to yours, the way real things always pass, below the accounts, hand to hand, among the invisible. You fall asleep with your thumb still against the hem, and one more thing rode down the river to Windsor with you, though you didn't know to call it what it was. A change in yourself, the kind you only see afterward, at a distance, the way you only see the shape of a garment once it's off the board. You came up this river a month ago knowing how to sew. You're going down it knowing what sewing is for. Those are different knowledges, as different as knowing letters and knowing what a letter can carry. Every trade has that second knowledge hidden inside the first, and no master can teach it. The work has to teach it, some particular piece of work that cracks the trade open and shows you the human matter inside. For you it was this, 3 weeks of black. You will embroider silks for brides for 40 years after this, and every one of them, though the brides never guess it, will be hemmed by a woman who understands that the same stitches serve the christening, the wedding, and the grave. That cloth is the one companion that attends every human ceremony, from the first swaddling to the last kissing, and that the person who sews it is therefore standing closer to the middle of life than most of the people wearing it. Bess knew. Walt knew. Up his ladder in the dark. All the invisible know it. It's the wage nobody records, you see. Something else, too, harder to say. Kneeling in that corner of the presence chamber, and behind that font at Windsor, you were the lowest person in the room by every measure the room believed in, and you watched dukes and bishops and the daughter of a king perform their grief inside rules stricter than any that bind you, watched a countess unable even to fall asleep except on her knees, watched officers required to break the very emblems of their lives over a grave on schedule. And somewhere in those hours a suspicion took root in you that never afterward quite died, that the pyramid crushes hardest near the top, that the gorgeous people are wearing their gorgeousness the way a horse wears a trapper, sewn double for strength, dragged through by main force, and that being invisible, which the world calls your misfortune, is also, if you hold it right, the only freedom on offer in a kingdom like this. Nobody breaks a stave over your life. Nobody inventories your griefs. When you cry, you may make a sound. Hold it right. That's the trick. And it takes a lifetime, and the river gives you your first quiet hours to begin. You think it's over. It isn't over. Funerals in this world have a long tail, and you're about to spend the winter living inside it. Because the burial is not the end of mourning, it's the door into it. The court is in black for months. The king himself will wear mourning until February, past Candlemas, an eternity by his own standards. And a court in black is a court that needs black clothes maintained, replaced, refreshed, altered. Black shows every mark. Black fades at the shoulders where cloaks rub. Black hems drag in winter mud and rot. And beyond the wardrobe of the living, there are the trentals and the month's mind, the great commemorative mass held a month after death, with its own hangings, its own candles, its own smaller repetition of everything. And there are the arms, gowns for the poor at every commemoration. Always more gowns, because the dead here are honoured in the arithmetic of warm cloth on cold backs. So Mistress Vaughan's workshop in Cheapside becomes, that winter, a satellite of the great wardrobe, and you go home to London. Home, which after a month feels smaller and lower and louder than you remembered. The shop room's familiar smell of silk and hemp and coal smoke wrapping around you like an old blanket. And the black work goes on by the light of winter candles, and the palace comes to you now in the form of orders and messengers and gossip carried up from the river. The gossip is how you follow the rest of it. Hear it the way you heard it second-hand at the workboard, over the whisper of thread. The king keeps to himself for weeks, at Whitehall, at Greenwich, wearing black, hearing masses. Those who see him say he is aged. Those who know him better say something stranger, that he speaks of her constantly gently as he never spoke of her while she lived. Jane this, Jane that, the best of wives, and that grief in him is turning as everything in him turns into a kind of possession. She's becoming perfect in his memory at exactly the speed that memory replaces the woman. The living Jane had a will. She knelt for the abbeys and was threatened into silence. She had opinions he crushed and a family he used. The dead Jane has none of that. The dead Jane gave him his son and made no trouble and asked for nothing forever. He will keep her portrait in the great dynastic mural at Whitehall. He will 10 years from now choose her grave for his own. It is the easiest thing in the world for that man to love finally and completely. A woman who can no longer surprise him. You're 16, and you understand this imperfectly. And the widow of Suffolk, who understands it perfectly, says it in 6 words, biting off a thread. Dead wives is quiet wives, girl. And this is the part that shocks even the workroom, even women who thought nothing could. Before the Queen is a month in her vault. The council is talking about the next one. Not the king, they say, not at first, his ministers. The realm has one prince, one small mortal boy in an age when children die like flies in autumn. And one prince is a thread, and thread breaks. Nobody needs to tell you that. You've bitten through 1,000 of them. And so, with the black hangings barely up for the month's mind, ambassadors are already being sounded about French princesses and imperial nieces, and Cromwell's clerks are drafting compliments, and the whole machinery that dressed Jane's death begins, without pausing, to sketch the wedding clothes of a woman not yet chosen. Within little more than 2 years there will be a 4th queen, a German duchess, Anne of Cleves, and the marriage will fail before the year's out, and there will be a 5th, and she will die on a scaffold like the 2nd. and then a sixth, and the sixth will outlive him. But that's ahead. That winter all you know is this: the wheel doesn't stop. You've seen inside it now. You know what turning it costs in wax and lead and cloth and knees and eyes, and you know who pays. One more thing happens that winter that you need to hear, because for 2 days it takes the bottom out of your stomach. In January, a clerk of the wardrobe comes to Cheapside. Routine, mostly reconciling accounts, counting delivered work against warrants, and among his papers is an inquiry, general and dry as dust, about the disposal of certain small goods of the late Queen's chambers. Item: sundry stuff of the Queen's closet given out unrecorded. The great things are all accounted: jewels, plate, furs, every ounce weighed and entered. But some officer somewhere has noticed that the small humble things melted away in the confusion of that week, as small things always do, and questions are being asked down the chain, not because anyone cares about a bone bodkin or a pincushion, but because in the king's household the account must balance, and someone junior must be made to sweat so the ledger can be closed with a clear conscience. The clerk reads out categories in the shop room in his flat voice: girdles, laces, sewing stuff. And your heart goes so loud you're certain the whole board can hear it, and the needle case in your cloak hem, hanging on its peg not 6 feet from the man, seems to burn through the wool like a coal. You say nothing. You've learned that much. The invisible survive by staying invisible. Mistress Vaughan answers his questions about delivered yardage in a voice like a closed ledger, and gives him mulled ale, and he warms himself and goes, and the inquiry dies somewhere up the chain the way such inquiries die, in the fog between departments, and nothing ever comes of it. Mistress Jaskin, you hear much later from Bess, answered simply that broken and mean stuff had been given in alms, which was true, and even the king's auditors will not chase a cracked bone needle case into the parishes of the poor. But for 2 nights you lie awake working out what you'd say, and it teaches you the last lesson of great houses, the one under all the others. Nothing there is ever quite given. Everything is only held. The lords hold their offices, the ladies hold their places, the officers held their white staves, and you saw with your own eyes what the house does with what it holds in the end. It breaks the stave over the grave. What Bess did, what Mistress Jaskin did, passing one small true thing sideways out of the machine into a girl's hem, that was the only kind of giving that place ever really does, and it has to happen in the dark, below the accounts, and it is never safe, and they did it anyway. Keep people like that when you find them. That's not history, that's just true. Spring comes, the black order's thin. The court's mourning ends officially and colour creeps back into the warrants. First greys and tawnies. Then, by summer, the full peacock blaze of a court being a court again. And the workshop turns back to ribbons and points and christening lace for aldermen's grandchildren. And your hands heal. Mostly. The callus under the thimble stays forever. 40 years on, you'll still be able to find it with your thumb, a little smooth dome of history in your own skin. And now, let the years go. This is where I take the calendar and fan the pages, because a life is long and a night is short, and you've earned the long view. You stay with Mistress Vaughan 4 more years, and then, because your hems have become quietly famous in the parish, and because you have saved your knotted pennies into a shocking little sum, and because a journeyman haberdasher named Nicholas Roper has spent 2 years finding reasons to walk down Cheapside past the shop, you marry and set up together in a narrow house in Watling Street, his stock below, your workroom above, and Bess Harding drinks at your wedding and cries, and Walt Piers sends a pound of good wax candles from the Palace Chandlery with a note that says, "In a scrivener's hired hand, for the little needle, burn these and spare your eyes. You take apprentices of your own. You teach them the way Hunger and Mistress Vaughan taught you. Warm your hands first. Watch my fingers, not my mouth. 14 to the inch or it comes out. You have children. You lose one in the way of this world, a girl in her second summer, and for a season you understand the Countess asleep on her knees, the body keeping the vow after the mind has gone, because you find you have knitted an entire winter's stockings without any memory of doing it. And through those years, at the distance of a workroom window, you watch the story you were part of keep unfolding, the way everyone in London watches, in proclamations and bonfires and bells. The prince grows. Edward, the boy whose birth rang 2,000 guns, is by every report a grave, clever, fragile-looking child, stuffed with Latin and scripture, guarded like treasure, motherless from his 12th day, raised by nurses and tutors and the machinery of the household, and they say the king dotes on him as much as that man can dote on anything he doesn't fear. The wives come and go above the city like weather. Cleves put aside, Howard to the block, and that morning the workroom is silent over its boards, because the 5th queen is 19 when she dies, younger than your own first apprentice. And then Pa, the last one, kind by all accounts, a mender of that broken family the way Jane had begun to be. And in January of 1547, you're 26 now, a wife, a mistress of your own board. The bells change their voices again, all across London, to the slow single stroke you know in your spine, and the word runs up from the river. The king is dead. Henry VIII, dead at Whitehall in the dark of a winter morning, huge and rotten and mortal after all 37 years a king. And the proclamation of his will tells London something that stops you where you stand with a pressing iron in your hand. He is to be buried at Windsor, in St. George's Chapel, in the choir, in the vault before the altar steps, with Jane, of 6 her, the wife who lasted 17 months, the pale quiet one the court called dull, the one whose funeral you sewed with your own cracked hands. Hers is the grave he chose to share for eternity, planned for years, ordered in his will. In February they carry him there in a procession 4 miles long. The coffin so vast it needs 16 yeomen and an engine to lower it, and the masons open the floor of the choir again, the same slab, the same chalk cold dark, and the King of England goes down into the small plain room where she's been waiting 10 years, and the staves break over him too, crack, 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 and the floor is closed. They will lie there together under a plain black slab for centuries. No great tomb ever finished, though he planned one of bronze and marble. His children will not build it. The metal will be sold off in a later war. Just a stone in a floor that choristers and tourists walk over, and her name cut on it beside his. The work gets done, the worker gets buried. Even that worker, even him. You hear the Windsor bells are ringing for King Edward VI, 9 years old, the bundle of white and gold you saw crossing a courtyard in the November cold. And you go up to your workroom and take your shears and cut, because there are mourning orders coming. You can feel them coming up the river already, and some other 16-year-old with clever hands is about to learn what black cloth smells like. You send word to the wardrobe that Roper's of Watling Street stands ready. Then you sit down by the window and you unpick, for the first time in 10 years, 3 inches of the hem of an old cloak you have never thrown away. The bone needle case rolls out into your palm, small and yellowed and cracked down one side, exactly as it was. You unscrew it. 3 needles, bright at the eye. A coil of white thread, still good. Linen keeps. You thread the finest of her needles with her own thread, and you sew the first seam of the old king's mourning with it. 1 seam only, a hem no one will ever see, on the inside of a poor man's gown bound for the alms distribution at the burial. Your best stitches. 14 to the inch. A message no one will ever read. From her hands through yours to the cold back of some London beggar who will pray for the king's soul because he was paid in warm cloth to do it, and might pray for hers for free. Then you put the case away in the hem again and sew it shut and get on with the work. Because there is always, always the work. And you have finally lived long enough to understand that this is not the sad part of the story. It's the part that lasts. Let the pages fan again. Faster now. This is how time actually feels from inside a life. Slow as a seam up close, and then you look up and 20 years have gone through the machine. The boy king reigns 6 years and dies at 15. Consumption, they say. Coughing his life out at Greenwich in the summer of 1553. The whole reason for everything. The prince who cost his mother her life outliving her by not quite 16 years. You're in your 30s when the bells toll for him, and you stand at your window with your hand pressed flat to your breastbone, because you are one of the last people alive who remembers the exact sound of the guns that greeted him, and it seems to you the 2 sounds are the same sound, only turned over, the way a hem is the same cloth, only turned. Then Mary, the girl in black behind the coffin, chief mourner all her life, queen at last, and her 5 years of fire and grief and the smell of smoke from Smithfield drifting over the city on bad days. And you keep your head down and your Latin prayers and your English Bible, both where each is safest, like everyone in London, because ordinary people learn to be amphibious in dangerous weather. Then she too is gone, and it is her sister's turn, Anne Boleyn's daughter, red-haired Elizabeth, and the world settles. Gradually, the way a workroom settles after a quarrel, everyone bent to their boards again, side-eyeing the door. And your own life fills up with its own history, the small kind that never gets a chronicle. The shop prospers, modestly, honestly. Nicholas grows grey and gouty and dear. Bess Harding dies in the year of the great influenza, 50-something and strong as a barge horse until the fever took her in 9 days. And you close the shop and cross the river to bury her, and you are one of 11 mourners, and afterward you go home and boil mutton fat with beeswax and rose water, and pot it up in little jars, her receipt, and give a jar to every apprentice you ever train from that day forward, and you never once tell them whose it was, and every one of them will pass it on, and somewhere down the centuries some woman rubbing salve into her cracked winter hands will be keeping Bess Harding alive without ever hearing her name, and that, you have decided, is how the likes of us are remembered, not in stone, in receipts, in habits of the hands. Walt Piers you lose track of the way you lose track of men who stay in service. The palace swallows its people until one Michaelmas, a carrier, delivers a small crate to Watling Street with no letter at all, only, packed in straw, a dozen wax candles of chandlery quality, and you laugh and cry at the same time standing in your own doorway, because some messages don't need a scrivener. Mistress Vaughan dies old and sharp-tongued and solvent, which is everything she ever wanted, and leaves you, to your astonishment, her second-best shears, German steel, a lifetime of edge left in them, and her ledgers, and in the back of the last ledger, in her narrow hand, a page headed "Girls Worth Teaching," going back 30 years, and your name is 4th on it. With a note beside it you have to sit down to read. See Aldworth, Bermondsey, hands like a gift from God. Feed her, feed her. That was all it took, in the end. Someone looked at a hungry girl hemming for farthings and saw the hands instead of the rags. You think of all the hands like yours that nobody ever looked at, gutting fish and carding wool and dying at 40 with their gift unspent, and you understand that you were not the best needle of your generation. You were merely the luckiest, and the difference between those two words is the whole sorrow of the world. And there's not one thing you can do about it except keep a page of your own in the back of your own ledger and feed who you can. You do. For 30 years you do. And then one September, you're past 60 now. Nicholas is 4 years in the churchyard of St. Antholin's. Your eyes need the window's best light, and your granddaughter threads your needles for you without being asked, sliding them into your pincushion eye out the way you like. One bright September, your son's business takes him upriver to Windsor about a matter of a livery cloth for the castle, and he says, half joking, that his mother, who never stops telling the story, might like to come and see the place again. You go. Of course you go. You take the granddaughter, Joan she's called, 12 years old, your hands reborn on the ends of her arms, God help her. And you go up the river you first travelled with a cargo of secret black cloth almost 50 years before, and the willows are the same, and the water is the same, and the castle comes up out of the afternoon, the same grey cliff it always was. And your heart does the same thing it did at 16, exactly the same thing, which is one of old age's rudest surprises. The heart doesn't age with the hands, it stays 16 in there banging on the door. St. George's Chapel is open between services, quiet, a verger sweeping. The banners of the Garter Knights hang over the stalls, more of them now, the colours of the new ones bright against the dusty old. The stone forest of the ceiling has not changed by one leaf, and in the floor of the choir, before the steps of the altar, there is a black slab, plain as a workroom table, and you stand over it with your granddaughter's hand in yours, and there are the words, and you read them to her in a whisper, because your voice will not do anything louder. The King, and Jane his Queen, that's all. No effigy of bronze, no chantry of marble. All his great plans for his own tomb came to nothing, melted, sold, scattered. The age of chantries died with him. There is just this stone in this floor, and people walk on it. While you stand there, a gentleman crosses the choir on some errand and steps on the slab without a glance, mid-conversation, and Joan stiffens with 12-year-old outrage, and you press her hand and shake your head. "He doesn't know," she whispers, scandalized. "He doesn't need to," you say. "Stone's for standing on." That's what she'd say, I think. She was a working sort of woman. You look down at the slab a long moment. "I sewed her funeral, you know. I know, grandmother." The patient sing-song of a child who's heard it 400 times. The hoods and the horse-cloths and the poor men's gowns. 14 to the inch. 14 to the inch. You look at your granddaughter looking at the grave of Jane Seymour. 3 lives lined up in one shaft of window light. The Queen under the floor. The old woman on top of it. The girl beside her with everything still in her hands. And you feel the thing you came all this way to feel, which is not grief. Grief wore out decades ago like a garment. What's left underneath is plainer and stranger. Continuity. The feeling of being one stitch in a seam so long you cannot see either end of it, and knowing the seam holds. Before you leave, when the verger's back is turned, you kneel. Joan hauls you up after, your knees being what they are, and you lay your palm flat on the black stone for the count of 10. The stone is cold. Stone is always cold. That never changes either. Somewhere under your hand, through slab and vault and lead and cerecloth and half a century, is the woman whose needles are riding at this very moment in the hem of the cloak on your own back, because you never moved them, and you never will, and you have left instruction, written, witnessed, tucked in the ledger, that the cloak goes to Joan, hem unopened, with a letter that explains to be read when she's grown. Let her find them the way everything true is found, below the accounts, hand to hand, among the invisible. You ride home to London with the tide, and Joan falls asleep against your shoulder before Staines, worn out with wonders, and you watch the banks go by in the failing light, the same banks, the same failing light, and you let yourself for the length of one bend of the river remember all of it at once, the smell of gall dye in a locked room, the bell that tolled and didn't stop, tallow smoke and frozen fingers, the Countess asleep on her knees, torchlight on a painted wooden face, 200 poor men warm in your stitches, the crack of white staves breaking over a hole in a chapel floor. Bess's voice, she'd have liked your hems. The wake of the barge closes over the water behind you, smooth as a well-turned seam, and the river carries you down toward the lights of the city, and the story, the part of it that was yours, folds itself up small at last and lies quiet, the way finished work lies quiet in a press, done and keeping. Stay with me a little longer in the dark, because before we let Cecily sleep, there are a few threads to tie off, the loose ends of the real history, the ones she never learned, the ones only time found out. The effigy, the painted wooden queen with the open eyes, was kept as royal funeral effigies were kept, among the strange half-sacred lumber of ceremony, and then time did to it what time does to everything made in a hurry for one great day. It came apart, was mislaid, was lost. Other effigies survived. You can stand today in Westminster Abbey and look into the actual carved faces made for other kings and queens, wood and wax staring back across the centuries. But Jane's is gone, and perhaps that's fitting. She spent her short public life being looked through rather than at, the plain one between the dazzling ones, and history mostly kept up the habit, because here's the truth about how she was remembered. For centuries she was a footnote with a good ending, the third wife, the one who won, the one he loved, as if dying in service were a kind of victory lap. The ballads got hold of her within a generation. There's an old song sung for 400 years in one version or another about the death of Queen Jane, full of things that never happened. Surgeons and desperate choices invented by singers who needed the story to have a villain or a bargain in it. Because the real story, an infection nobody could see killing a healthy young woman, while the best minds of a kingdom stood by helpless, was somehow harder to sing. People would rather believe death was a decision someone made than admit it was simply the water everyone swam in. Half of everything strange about the past comes down to that. They lived waist-deep in death, and they built all their ceremonies, the wax, the lead, the bells, the black, as sea walls against it, and the sea came in anyway every time, and they rebuilt the walls every time, and if you want to know what human beings are, that's as good an answer as any. We are the creature that rebuilds the sea-wall. The boy she died producing carried her in one visible way all his short life. Edward kept her memory with the son's strange second-hand devotion, a mother he could not remember, presented to him in portraits and other people's stories, perfect and painless, the only figure in his terrifying family who had never once disappointed him, because she'd never had the chance. When they came to bury him at 15, they laid him at Westminster, not Windsor. The family that was supposed to gather around Jane's vault never gathered. Only Henry came, in the end. In the whole sprawling, blood-soaked, six-wived saga of that man, the quietest fact is still the loudest. Given every choice a king could have, he chose to lie next to her. You can make of that whatever you like. The court did. Historians have. Cecily, if you asked her, would probably have said what the widow of Southwark said, or something kinder. She went back and forth on it herself over the years, at the workboard in the dark. Some questions are for keeping, not answering, and the chapel keeps them both. That's the part you can still touch. Go to Windsor now, this year, any year, and walk into St. George's, under the same stone forest, past the same stalls, and there in the choir floor is the slab, replaced and relettered in a later century, but marking the same vault, the same small chalk room, and the choir sings over it every day, and tourists step on it mid-conversation, and somewhere below, in lead, in cerecloth, in the Patience of the Dead, Jane Seymour is still lying where the ropes and the quiet men lowered her, while a 16-year-old sempstress watched from behind a pillar with aching hands. 490 years next autumn. The bells of the parishes between Hampton and Windsor still hang in mostly the same towers. The river still takes the same bends. Willows still. The palaces are still there too. Hampton Court's chapel ceiling still burns blue and gold. The kitchens still smell of wood smoke on days they light the old fires for visitors. The wine still doesn't run in the conduits at Cheapside. But Cheapside is still a street, and Bermondsey is still Bermondsey, and if you walk it, you're walking on top of the parish where a hungry girl once hemmed kerchiefs for farthings in a church porch, 14 stitches to the inch in bad light, with cold fingers, unaware that she was auditioning for history. None of the work folk in this story got a chronicle. You understand that, don't you? That's why I could tell you Cecily's story at all. The queens are pinned to the record like moths, every gown inventoried, every symptom transcribed. But the accounts that paid for Jane Seymour's funeral record the cloth and the wages, and almost never the names, and the hands themselves, the hundreds of hands that cut and hemmed and tacked and mended, that broke the pavement and cast the lead and tended the 10,000 candles, went back into the crowd they came from, and the crowd closed over them like water. Cecily is my needle for sewing you into that crowd. But the bruise under the thimble was real on someone. The gall-stained knuckles were real on someone. Somebody's eyes really did give out early. Somebody really did fall asleep kneeling. Somebody, you can be sure of it, kept some small, forbidden, true thing sewn into a hem, because people always have in every century, under every account book ever balanced. The invisible have always kept their own records. You've spent tonight reading one, and now the candle is low, and the workroom is closing, and it's time to put the day away. So come back one last time to Watling Street, to the old woman by the window, home from Windsor, her granddaughter asleep upstairs, the city quieting around her the way London quiets. Never fully, just lower and lower, cart by cart, voice by voice, until what's left is the river hush under everything, the sound the city makes when it thinks no one is listening. She banks the fire. Small movements, practised 50 years. The rake, the ash drawn over the coals, the fireguard set just so. Her hands know it without her. Her hands know everything without her now. That's what a life of work leaves you. A body full of quiet knowledge, doing its offices in the dark like the good servant it always was. She climbs the stair, one hand on the rail, and the third step creaks, the way it has creaked for 30 years. The the way she has left it creaking on purpose, because a house should answer when you touch it. The bedchamber is cold, and the sheets are colder, and then, slowly, they are not. Her own warmth coming back to her out of the linen, the oldest trade there is, heat given and returned. Outside the shutter, a watchman passes, calling the hour low, more habit than announcement. A dog answers somewhere and thinks better of it. The house ticks and settles around her, timber easing its shoulders, and under everything faint, the river. Her hands ache tonight, the deep old ache, the weather ache, the 50 years of 14 to the inch ache. She folds them on her breast the way she's folded them every night since Nicholas died, and works her right thumb once across the callus under her left thimble finger, her little smooth dome of history, and lets them rest. They've earned it. Listen. They have hemmed christening gowns and shrouds, poor men's arms cloth and one queen's mourning. They have held 3 years of pennies knotted in a stocking, and a husband's hand for 30 years, and children living and dead, and shears of German steel, and a granddaughter's fingers learning their first stitch. They have done, stitch by stitch by stitch, more work than any chronicle could hold, and now they're just an old woman's hands, folded in the dark, aching quietly, done for the day. That's you, by the way. You've understood that for a while now, I think. Whatever your hands have held, needles or keyboards, steering wheels or babies, other hands, they are lying somewhere quiet right now, done for the day, full of their own invisible record. You've earned this too. Centuries will pass. The London she knows will burn and be rebuilt and grow past all recognizing. The workshops will fill with machines that sew 1,000 stitches a minute, and no one will remember what 14 to the inch cost a human hand. The palaces will fill with visitors holding little glowing lights, photographing the ceilings she stood under with her head back like a fool. But people will still sit up with their dying, still dress their grief as carefully as they can afford, still pass small true things hand to hand, below the accounts, still lie down at the end of long days with aching hands and let the dark come in like a tide. Some things don't change. The needle finds the cloth, the bell finds the hour, the tired body finds the bed. You're warm enough now, safe enough, tired enough. You have a roof and a bed, and tomorrow waiting patiently on the other side of sleep, and that's more than most of the people in this story ever counted on, and it's enough. It's enough. It's enough. Tomorrow there will be work. There's always the work. Tomorrow there will be noise and errands and the whole loud machinery of the living. But that's tomorrow, and tomorrow is not allowed in here. In here it's just this, the banked fire, the settling house, the river under everything. Let it come now. Let sleep take you the way it took Cecily in the narrow house on Watling Street, the way it took a countess kneeling on chapel stone, the way it takes every tired worker at the end of every long day since days began. Let the city fade. Let the bells quiet. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. The candle's out. The seam is closed. The work will keep. Good night.